So, yesterday, both my sessions have question marks because at the end of the day, there aren't actual absolute answers to any questions in this area that we're dealing with. But, you know, it's 25 years since Oslo. Next month. It's 25 years since Oslo. The famous handshake on the White House lawn. There was Rabin, there was Arafat, there was Clinton, Big Brother, you know, holding it all together. And, like, where are we? So the real question is, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to talk about whether it's in day school, whether it's in the community, whether it's with the non-Jewish community. The whole question of the conflict and the two-state question is very, very difficult to talk about. And then we start to rely upon dates and we start to rely upon a historical account. We're all scared to give our own opinions. So my way of dealing with it is, and I hope that at the end of this session, just like at the end of yesterday's session, nobody really has an idea of what my opinion about the conflict is, because frankly, who really cares about my personal opinion? The idea is, as long as we are there in an advocacy sense, trying to put out a line that we think is right, that we've developed by ourselves, we're going to fail, in my view. So what I'm trying to do in the things that I do is to try and see, is there a narrative line that holds together, that has logic, and that we can express as a view that the majority of the people of Israel either hold to or will hold to or are happy to go for. And yesterday's topic was, what is Zionism? And if we can define what Zionism is, we'll have a better idea of what the end goal of the State of Israel is. But we're not going to revisit that whole topic. But here we are at 25 years since Oslo. And I've got to tell you, I'm not one of the people, I think we flogged the Balfour Declaration to death. I'm not one of the people that really thinks that's all that important. Because in and of itself, one country made a decision about an area that really, you know, wasn't theirs to make a decision about. And we trumpeted it. They made the same decision, a similar declaration with the opposite side. So big deal. If the UK will say something today by itself, am I going to be that concerned about it? Really? So I try to look at a narrative form, and I go back approximately 100 years. I also like to always throw in, and I think it's very important in Australia, to throw in the connection. No two countries are more connected or intersected than Australia and Israel in historical terms. And I think it's very important to understand that at the first Anzac Day, 1915 at Gallipoli, there fought alongside the Anzacs, Trumpeldor, and the Zionist Mule Corps, the first Jewish fighting force in over 2,000 years. And one of the most important and incredible Australian Jewish Anzacs that nobody ever heard of, Lieutenant Colonel Eliezer Margolin. Anybody heard of him? Oh, okay. DSO became the commander of the Jewish Brigade, the Jewish Legion, who fought under him Private David Ben-Gurion, Nehemi Rabin, the father of Yitzhak Rabin, Bel Katzenelson, two future presidents of the State of Israel, all under an Australian Jewish Anzac today buried in Rehovot. And really, it was when the end of the First World War came. Okay, the Balfour Declaration was 1917, but it was after that, end of the First World War, that there was the first real united change of the map. So I also I think it's very important when we're doing this sort of thing to quote, if we're talking about the other side, to quote the other side and to understand what the other side says. And I also, and this confuses people if they come with preconceived ideas, I prefer to quote Israeli Zionist leftists, because they are so right-wing that people don't even get here. We're disconnected. The left and the right outside of Israel are a bit disconnected from the left and the right in Israel. It's 5 years since Oslo. Former member, I don't know if you can read this, it's quite small, Michael Barzocha says, an agreed diplomatic solution between Israel and the Palestinians is nowhere in sight. That's a statement on Oslo. Avi Gabay, by the way, you should know, his wife, Australian connection, born in Bondi, member of Bondi Mizrahi Synagogue. Went on Aliyah, she had no say in it, she was 2 months old. But from the Sobel family. But Avi Gabay is the leader of the Labour Party, or Zionist Union today. He said there should be no reason to dismantle settlements as part of a peace deal. Remember, it was the Labour Party that actually built the majority of settlements, not the Likud. It was only the Likud that gave them up. That's a truism in general politics. Aleph Bet Yehoshua, nobody would call him a right-winger, right? He said Yasser Arafat misled the world at Oslo and trampled the Oslo Accords with the Intifada, with the terror attacks. He also blamed Mahmoud Abbas for rejecting Olmert's offer in 2008, which we'll see shortly in maps. Anat Will, she brought out a book now. It's in Ivrit only at the moment. It's called The Right of Return War. You know the Gaza War? The Right of Return War. She says her party made a wrong assumption at Oslo, that the Palestinians are ready for peace was unfounded. I'm only quoting the Israeli left. I'm not quoting anybody from the right. So, 100 years ago, the World War I ended. The world powers decided that's going to be the Jewish state. That was what they decided. You know, after a few centuries of Ottoman rule, place is empty. A couple of years later, the British and the French, you know, they're always very reliable. They can always be counted upon to do the wrong thing. They created a fake country. They called it Transjordan. There was a bit of a problem over here in Arabia, today Saudi Arabia, between some Saudi princes and the Hashemites. So they said, you know what, we'll give them this. So they took away about 70% of what the world had decided would be the British mandate for the Jewish state, because of course Jews weren't yet able to rule themselves. And what was the Palestinian reaction to the whole concept of the Third Jewish Commonwealth? The conflict, the Palestinian Arab High Executive made a statement, either us or the Zionists, there is no room for both. That's a 100-year-old narrative that hasn't changed till today. Now, anybody who goes into the assumption that there's something different is already going to come to a funny conclusion. Yes?
Sorry, we didn't say you say that they decide to give you that part to Palestine, but who decide? Which part of the world? Who decide this will be the land?
At the end of World War I, the League of Nations met. There was a whole variety of, you had a whole area that was, you know, under Ottoman rule, which wasn't delineated. You had a Sykes-Picot agreement and so on and so forth, to divide up that whole map into various states, to create a whole lot of states. Some of them are failed states, like Iraq and so forth. But the world decided, it was like the pre-runner of the United Nations,
okay.
All right, that this part will be, oh, I forgot, it's an interactive keyboard,
okay.
Screen, that this will be the mandate for the Jewish state. Then, 78% of it, they decided just a year or two later, in 1922, it's going to be the Transjordan. And now, we're talking about this bit of land. That's the mandate for the Jewish people. All right, either us or the Zionists. They were very clear. We should listen to them all. Then, again, a great Australian connection. The single most important non-Jew in the establishment of the State of Israel was the Australian Foreign Minister, Dr. Herbert Everett, who steered through the Partition Plan in the United Nations on Kaftet of November. It was supposed to be 27th of November. They'd have to change every street name in every town in Israel, but because in every town there's a Kaftet of November street. Steers through a decision to establish the Jewish state. His daughter is still alive. She lives in the Blue Mountains. It's so important. Last year, 70th anniversary, 29th November, we held in Federal Parliament here, with Julie Bishop presiding, a special ceremony where the Australian Parliament and the Australian people marked the role that Australia played in the establishment of the State of Israel. And what was the Partition Plan? It was a two-state solution, a Jewish state and an Arab state. Nobody spoke then about Palestinians. They weren't considered a distinct and separate people at the time. A Jewish state and an Arab state. It's very important to understand that was the map. The brownish areas were us. The purplish areas them. Where's Jerusalem? Yeah, but it's not under our sovereignty. We accepted a state. What is this map based on? How did they decide the purple and brown areas? One word. Population. Demography. We accepted a state. Prime Minister Ben Gurion, well, he wasn't Prime Minister yet, future Prime, he was head of the Jewish Agency. Head of the Jewish Agency, Ben Gurion, says, we the Jewish people accept a two-state solution, and we're going to divide that area accept it according to demographic division, and it will be guaranteed rights in Jerusalem. We can go and visit Jerusalem, we can go and visit the Kotel, etc., etc. But we will accept the state without the historical Jewish capital. What's the second most holy city? Hebron. We will accept the state without Hebron. Why are we called Jews? Why are we not called Haifians? Or Tel Avivians?
Judea.
We're from Judea. We're from Yudav Shomron. We're from the West Bank. But we're going to take a state that's near the Holy Land or close to the Holy Land, or you can see the Holy Land, because the essence of the Zionist movement is what? Can't be about land, can't be about Jerusalem.
Sovereignty.
Jewish people deciding the future of the Jewish people. After 2,000 years of wandering around the world and other people deciding our fate. And by the way, folks, it's also a bit of a problem when you have the right to decide your own fate, because you have to make decisions about things you never had to make decisions about, which leads to other complexities. But the principle was, we accepted, they rejected. That's a two-state solution. We accepted, they rejected. The Ben Gurion, in his first address to the Knesset, 1949, Knesset, the Parliament of the Jewish people, the Parliament of the State of Israel. You know, not many women in the cabinet at the time. And Ben Gurion used to call the only woman, Golda Meir. What did he say about her? She's the best man in the cabinet. You know, they tell a story that it was freezing in the cabinet room, and one man after another got up to try and change the dials to turn it down. Nobody succeeded. Finally, Golda gets up and she just unplugs the air conditioning unit. And she solved the problem. But in his first address to the Knesset, he lays down the mantra that every single Prime Minister has stuck to since. Faced with the choice of all the land without a Jewish state or a Jewish state without all the land, we chose a Jewish state without all the land. It was a choice we made. And no Prime Minister has changed that. No Prime Minister has changed that choice. As yet. So at the end of the War of Independence, this is the history of all the conflict with Israel and its neighbours. They start a war, we get more territory. That's the history of conflict. So at the end of the war, we end up with that from the original mandate. We're familiar with the map, right? But not anybody was at the session yesterday. Is there anyone in the room? Put up your hand if you think you can draw a map of the state of Israel. You can? Nobody can draw a map of the state of Israel. No such thing exists, because the state of Israel doesn't have fully, all its boundaries are not fully determined. This is a green line. That's where an armistice, that's where a war ended. That's a truce line. That's not an international border. The world didn't recognize that as the border of Israel. You know, if you go on the Israeli Foreign Ministry website, you'll see one map of Israel. If you go on the Prime Minister's office website, you'll see a different map of Israel. I did an exercise with August last week, the August leadership. I put 5 maps around the room. And I said, August has decided that it's now going to be overtly connected to Israel. It's going to put a map of Israel on its masthead. Go and stand under the map that you want as part of your... And then I showed that none of the maps were actually correct, or accurate at least. So that's one of the big problems. At the end of the 6-Day War, in a war we didn't begin, we ended up with Gaza, the Sinai, the Golan, and we got Yudav Shomron, or the West Bank, whatever term you want to use, and we got Jerusalem. Immediately following the 6-Day War, in a government of national unity, which included Menachem Begin, what did Israel do? Well, what month was the 6-Day War? June. Okay. You asked a question in some of the schools. Kids do things faster now. We asked what happened in June 1967. They said the 3-Day War. It got a lot quicker. So after the 6-Day War, still in June, a government of national unity, including Menachem Begin, offered Syria, all of the Golan Heights, Egypt, all of the Sinai, Jordan, everything, the whole West Bank, with the exception of Jerusalem. Right? What happened? August 29th in Khartoum, the Arabs said, no to peace, no to negotiation, no to recognition of the State of Israel. 51 years later, we're still stuck with the dilemma. We have the Holy Land. What else did we get with the Holy Land? A whole bunch of people that either fled, were driven out, I don't care whatever terminology you want to use, left 19 years earlier in the War of Independence. Their Arab brothers and sisters didn't absorb them. You know, we had 800,000 Jews that were driven out of Arab lands. We absorbed them. You can't tell who's a Jewish refugee today in Israel. What happens when you're sitting on the green line? You're not allowed into the Arab countries. You don't have education. What do you do when you sit there? What do you do? What do you do when you sit there all day? You have kids. You have kids. You grow in number. So we got the land and we got the people. We can't solve the problem because we don't talk about the same thing. The Arab world is stuck in 1948. Israel was created in sin. There's no change. Let's not say the Arab world. Let's say the leadership of the Palestinian people. Because the Arab world may be different today. The leadership of the Palestinian people are debating 48. We're debating 67. They're talking about whether Israel should exist. We're talking about how big or small Israel should be. We're not on the same plane. Their narrative is very simple. Ours is very complicated. And we don't even agree ourselves on what the narrative is. And we want to share, or do we? And even if we want to share, what are we sharing and where are we sharing it?
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So you're saying we did that, they did that. Is there nuance in that? Is there, because obviously Ben-Gurion accepted the partition plan, but there was a lot of criticism from inside. The Arab leadership or the Palestinian leadership didn't accept it. There were voices from inside. Do you allow for that kind of internal discussion? Do you try to emphasize more moderate voices or try to listen to them? Do you allow room for
So if we have a term,
progress or change
if we have a
in
term,
that? Because there might be some, as you said, there's a change in the Arab world now. Now Kuwait and Saudi Arabia.
this is an
are starting
unfair
to-
discussion because we
Sorry.
had an hour on this discussion yesterday, just the two of us, and it was very good for me. It was very good for me. If we have an entire term to go through the topic, of course we have to go into nuance, right? But if we don't spend a term on it, but if we're trying to get to the key points, then I would say that their side is far less nuanced and our side is far more nuanced. And it's much harder to hand nuance over than ever. But before we even get to nuance, you've got to get to the basic issue. Why is there no solution 51 years later or 70 years later? Yes?
Sorry, I just wanted to ask your opinion on this. To me, by saying there isn't a finite map of Israel that everybody can agree on,
Yeah, that's troubling.
is actually exacerbating the issue for me.
Uh-huh.
So because what it's essentially doing is it's dividing us as a body, which feeds into the hands of everybody else.
So I agree, we're divided.
Instead, saying we need to come to some commonality here on just even the idea of the map.
Every Israeli Prime Minister, okay, countries come and go. Yugoslavia once was a country, it's gone. Right? Countries come and go. And every Prime Minister's of Israel's first order of business is to decrease the insecurity of the State of Israel. And it's a great insecurity to not be able to draw yourself on a map. Russia recognized the State of Israel long before the United States, because Russia didn't care about those things. The United States said, Under Secretary of State Lovett said, there's no precedent for recognizing a state you cannot identify the boundaries of, and wanted the United States not to recognize the State of Israel back in 48. So it's a unique country. It's not just unique in other ways, it's unique in that way as well. It doesn't have just disputed territories. The map of the State of Israel is a disputed map. When we made an international agreement with the Kingdom of Jordan, we defined where Jordan began and ended. We did not define where Israel begins and ends. Yes, the Mediterranean is a border. In 2000 we made a border under the United Nations. You know, the United Nations likes colours, so that we wanted to use the green colour. So we call it the blue line with Lebanon. That's an international boundary. Gaza, they didn't have good in 2005, we left, but it's not an international boundary. And certainly the green line is not an international boundary. It's one of our insecurities. It's one of our dilemmas.
I'm saying that
All right, it's a problem. I can't draw the border of the State of Israel to solve that one, but we have to understand that's part of the insecurity. So, State of Israel, a Declaration of Independence. I'm not going to discuss the nation-state bill. We did that yesterday. The establishment of the Jewish state. That's the Declaration of Independence. And everybody will have equal rights, regardless of whether they're Jewish or not. That's the Declaration of Independence. Tzipi Livni, I like to quote her, she's now the head of the opposition, the parliamentary opposition in Israel, right? She said now, Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people At the same time, equality is Jewish and democratic value, and being a Jewish state with equal rights to all the citizens means that Israeli Arabs have equal rights as citizens, although their national aspirations will not be fulfilled in Israel. That's the leader of the opposition in the Knesset. Israel will remain a Jewish state. Equal rights for everybody. It's in fact why the opposition want a Palestinian state. Or, as Bibi Netanyahu said, and I quote, to the one place he is very popular, which is the United States Joint House of Congress, only 2 years ago, Bibi Netanyahu said to the American people and to the American leadership, I want a Palestinian state to be big enough. Many people disregard his speech to the Americans. To be big enough and to be prosperous enough, direct quote, so that it can accommodate the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian state will be the solution to the Palestinian refugee problem. There's only so long that the people who think differently can keep saying that Bibi's insincere. So, if you want to understand what the Arabs say, Mahmoud Abbas was very clever until now, but now he made earlier this year quite an amazing statement. Number one, that most of us in this room are not Jews. Number two, the Jews are the reason for the Holocaust by our behavior. And number three, the Jews are not connected to the State of Israel. It's in Arabic, but you can read the subtitles, if it plays, which it will.
سيدنا يعقوب 12 منين جبت 13 اخترعوه وين في مملكة الخزر متى في القرن التاسع هذه مملكة كانت لا دينية ثم صارت مملكة يهودية تهود الإمبراطور فتهودت ثم انفضت وهاجر كل سكانها نحو أوروبا وهؤلاء هم اليهود الأشكناز اليهود الأشكناز لا ساميين ولا له علاقة بالسامية ولا له علاقة لا بسيدنا إبراهيم ولا سيدنا يعقوب ولا غيره. هؤلاء اليهود الذين انتقلوا إلى أوروبا الشرقية والغربية كانوا في كل 10-15 سنة يتعرضون لمذبحة من دولة ما منذ القرن ال11 حتى الهولوكوست اللي صار في ألمانيا. تمام؟ لكن ليش كانت تحصل هذه؟ هم يقولون لأننا يهود. ليس العداء لليهودية بسبب دينهم وإنما بسبب وظيفتهم الاجتماعية. هذه قضية مختلفة. إذا المسألة اليهودية التي كانت منتشرة في كل دول أوروبا ضد اليهود ليست بسبب دينهم وإنما بسبب وظيفتهم الاجتماعية اللي بتعلق في الربا والبنوك وإلى آخره. هنا الآن نتكلم عن الوطن اليهودي. الوطن اليهودي هم بيقولوا شوقا إلى صهيون وإحنا رايحين وكذا كله. أنا بقول مش أنا، التاريخ يقول لا أساس له من الصحة.
The amazing thing is that this speech, which happened this year, caused a dramatic change in the mindset of the left in Israel. And explains why the two-state solution is dying. J Street, all right, we all know who J Street is, said Abbas's speech featured absurd anti-Semitic tropes, deeply offensive comments on the history of Jewish people. It's vile. It's impossible to view Abbas as a viable negotiating partner. It's not my comment, it's J Street's comment. So, here we are, 51 years later, we're trying to work out what to do with the Yudav Sharon West Bank. And the question comes up again, what to do with who? Is there somebody out there there's anybody to do anything with? Daniel Hartman, I quoted him yesterday in a different sense, is a rabbi of a school in Jerusalem. He's the headmaster of a school. He happened to be on a tour in America whilst the Gaza dispute's going on. He's known in Israel as a centre leftist. Israelis look at Gaza, don't see innocents being moved around. Israelis don't want the West Bank to turn into Gaza. They understand what's happening in Gaza. They don't want to give up the West Bank. He wants a two-state solution. But they don't want to give up the West Bank and find out that they've got another Gaza. He's usually very tolerant of diaspora Zionists, but he says diaspora Zionists have the luxury of dwelling in the realm of the imagination. We can picture the ideal Israel, and that's who we're dealing with when we talk to people. And we can even annoy Israelis with our insistence of what can't be. But he talks about what happens when imagination meets the reality of Arab and Iranian rejection. And imagination gets you dead in that neighborhood, says Daniel Hartman. So, what is a Jewish state? We're not going to be able to answer that question because it means something different to different people in the room. But is Zionism about land or is it about self-determination? If we follow Ben Gurion, but if we follow Ben Gurion and Bibi, we're talking about land is a means to self-determination. We're not saying that land is the most important thing. Self-determination is still the most important thing. Jewish people determining the fate of Jewish people is still the central core theme of the State of Israel. Has implications.
But also,
Yeah, go on.
but also you also need to add there culture. It's also integrating the Zionism.
Why do I need to add that?
Islam is self-determination and culture.
But no. Now you're adding your interpretation of what Zionism is. I'm not talking about my interpretation.
It's what I do.
Fine, but you and me are not making the decisions. We're trying to work out what the leadership of Israel is leading to. Not what I think should be. As I said, you shouldn't know what I think about it at all. And maybe when you're talking to the students, putting your own interpretation on is confusing. Because then when Israel does something contrary to your belief or my belief, then how do you explain that? Either Israel went off track, right? Or went contrary to Judaism, as some people like to say, or went contrary to Jewish values, or contrary to Jewish culture. Let's try and understand what Israel wants, or what the majority of people are talking about. At the end of the day, it's always been demography versus geography. And we've always come down, so far, on demography. Why would Shamir not annex the West Bank? Let's say he was, after Ben Gurion, the most right-wing prime minister in the history of Israel. Why would he not annex the West Bank? Because of demography. He liked the geography, but he couldn't put up with the demography. And we're committed to democracy, ethics, human, that all has implications. Okay, we're not going to talk about what democracy is because there's many different forms of democracy. But it's very hard to have a democracy and Jewish people determining the fate of the Jewish people if you don't have a sufficient Jewish majority. And is 50% enough? Is 55%? We don't agree ourselves on how Israel should look. It's quite interesting that since the establishment of the State of Israel, about 20% of the population consistently has been non-Jewish. At the War of Independence, about 600,000 Jews, about 100,000 Arabs, 20%. Today it's the same, plus minus. The demography hasn't changed. Different factors have shaped it, but it hasn't changed. Security. We all have different ideas on security. I bet you if I took a poll here today and asked, did the Hitnat Kut, the disengagement in 2005 from Gaza, did it bring Israel more security? I'd be willing to bet my bottom dollar that the majority of people here would say it did not. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
I think it brought Israel immeasurably increased security. It did not help the people of Sderot. But the position of Israel in the world changed. In Yom Kippur War, European countries would not allow American planes to land at American bases to refuel on their way to rearm Israel. Today, where's Bibi going the whole time? He's this international statesman. America and Russia are fighting a war against each other in Syria, a proxy war, and they both think they agree on one thing, that Bibi's great and Israel's interests should be protected. Israel has friends today, never had. Friends are important. Israel is a very strong country. That disengagement from Gaza brought us a lot of friends. It brought us a lot of legitimacy. I'm not going to argue now. I'm just trying to argue both sides. The point is I'm trying to make is that security doesn't just come in one form. In Israel, the left is one. The left one. I don't believe in left and right, but we're using those terms in inverted commas. The left convinced the population of Israel that we need separation. The right also won. The right convinced the people of Israel that we need security, and separation will lead to insecurity. That's the West Bank. Please don't take my view if I just call the West Bank. It's easier than all the time saying West Bank, Yehuda v'Shomron. We know about areas A, B, and C. We just were in Israel. We heard a sort of a joke. I don't know if I should tell it, but basically area A, Aravim. Area B, Biyachad. Area C, Celano, which I know should be Shalano, but it takes. What that means in English is Area A is Arab. No Jew lives there, controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Area B is Arab. No Jew lives there, controlled jointly by the Palestinians and the State of Israel. Area C, all the Jews that are living over the Green Line live there. We don't really know how many, but let's say approximately 350,000, plus minus, and about 50,000 Arabs in Area C. And that's under Israeli control. So the question is, that's the demographic picture of the West Bank. So we tried in Kaftet November, we tried in Camp David. And eventually we came to 2008. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert details in even more clarity the Camp David proposal. This is the two-state solution. It's very simple to see. The blue are the Israeli settlements, Gush Etzion, Ma'ale Adumim. Who's the father of Gush Etzion? Who built Gush Etzion? Which party? Left or right? Labour. Who built Ma'ale Adumim? Left or right? 1974 Labour. Yitzhak Rabin. Who claimed to be the father of Ariel? Shimon Peres. Okay, so you've got the blue patches are going to stay with us. 86% of the Jewish settler population, if we use that term again in inverted commas, live in those blue patches. I might be too loud. Live in those blue patches. And in exchange for that land, this is Gaza here, the Palestinians will get those brown areas. So it's a land swap. And this map entails us moving approximately 50,000 Jews. Remember what it was arranged to take 9,000 Jews out of Gaza, but Israel's a much bigger population today, 8.5 heading to 9 million people, 50,000. And by the way, according to Israel, it doesn't mean moving them across the Green Line, but moving them into the settlement blocks. Mahmoud Abbas, who no longer Arafat's gone from the picture, Mahmoud Abbas, the new great peacenik, refuses to take the map. That's the best tactic. They never say yes, they never say no. They refuse to take the map, but you know what? He can draw very, very well. He goes back and on Palestinian Authority letterhead, he draws what he remembers. The 3 blocks, the exchange of territory, right? Never heard from them again, 2008. Because they're stuck in 48. Accepting the two-state solution means accepting one state on this side. For us, accepting the two-state solution is a sharing. 2 different paradigms. So, now, if the two-state solution isn't going to happen today, because there ain't anybody else, what are the options? What are the options for the two-state solution? I'm going to show you the next clip. It's Naftali Bennett's clip on partial annexation, annexing Area C. Why I'm showing you the clip is because I want you to see this guy is the head of what used to be called the National Religious Party, right? And he is selling an partial annexation picture based without one mention of biblical history, Jewish connection. He's purely selling it on pragmatic lines. It's in Hebrew about the subtitle.
יש דברים שרובנו מבינים שכבר לא יקרו. הספר לא יחזרו לעונה נוספת, ארמי קליינשטיין כבר לא יגדל אפרו, וגם הסכם שלום עם הפלסטינים לא יקרה. זה פשוט לא ריאלי. למה? הסיפור הוא די פשוט. הקמת מדינה פלסטינית על בסיס קווי 67 היא בלתי אפשרית, משום שהיא תסכן את מדינת ישראל. מבחינה ביטחונית זה ישכפל את עזה לתוך יהודה ושומרון, מה שיגביר את ייצוא המתכת לתוך שטח ישראל. דבר שני, מאגרי המים שהמקור שלהם ביהודה ושומרון מספקים 50% ממי השתייה בישראל. גם מבחינה דמוגרפית, מדינה פלסטינית תהיה מגנט להגירה של מיליוני פליטים לתוך שטחי יהודה ושומרון. הלחץ הדמוגרפי על הקו הירוק ייצור כמות אדירה של מסתננים, שתגמד את ההסתננויות מאפריקה כיום. וישראל תאבד את הרוב שיש לה בין הירדן והים. בנוסף, בואו נזכור שמסביבנו יש עדיין כמה מדינות שלא ממש מתות עלינו. במקרה של מתקפה ממזרח, בקעת הירדן היא מחסום גיאוגרפי טבעי בגלל הפרשי הגובה. מנגד, סיפוח של כל יהודה ושומרון והקמת מדינה דו-לאומית תבטל את האופי של ישראל כמדינה יהודית. אז מה עושים? אפשר לא לעשות כלום ולקוות שהכל יסתדר מעצמו. הבעיה היא שבזה אנחנו מפקירים את הזירה ליוזמות פלסטיניות. ואפשר גם לעשות את מה שהציונות תמיד עשתה, לקחת את גורלנו בידינו. וכאן נכנסת תוכנית הסיפוח החלקי. היא לא תייצר גן עדן, אבל תשפר מאוד את המצב שלנו. המצב היום הוא כזה. יהודה ושומרון מחולקים לשטחי A, B ו-C. שטחי A ו-B נמצאים בשליטה פלסטינית. כאן גרים 97% מהפלסטינים. ושטחי C נמצאים בשליטה ישראלית. בשטח הזה גרים כל 350,000 המתיישבים היהודים ורק 48,000 פלסטינים. שטח C כולל גם את הנקודות החיוניות לביטחון ישראל. התוכנית היא לספח את שטח C לשטח מדינת ישראל. לפלסטינים יתאפשר שלטון עצמי בשטחים A ו-B, ורציפות תחבורתית תבטיח שכל תושב יוכל להגיע מכל מקום ביהודה ושומרון לכל מקום אחר בלי לראות מחסום צה"לי אחד. ל-48,000 הפלסטינים שחיים בשטח C תוצא אזרחות ישראלית, או אם יעדיפו תושבות, כמו תושבי מזרח ירושלים. זה בקושי ידגדג את המאזן הדמוגרפי של מדינת ישראל, אבל יוציא את האוויר מהמפרשים של מי שמאשים אותנו באפרטהייד. הגבולות הנוכחיים עם ירדן ועזה יישארו, והשמירה אף תהודק כדי למנוע חדירה של צאצאי פליטים פלסטינים וטרור. ישראל תזכה ליציבות מבחינה ביטחונית ודמוגרפית, ואף אחד לא יגורש מביתו. ומה יגיד העולם? העולם לא מכיר בריבונות הישראלית בירושלים או ברמת הגולן. אז אפשר להוסיף לרשימה גם את שטחי C.
So I don't show you that to advocate for that plan or to be against that plan. I simply want to point out that if we're looking for the narrative, that's the common narrative, it doesn't really matter what he thinks to himself and what he says inside his party. In selling it to the state of Israel, in putting it out there to the electorate, he's not talking about anything other than two factors. One is, what was one factor? Security. And the other factor was demography. We can take it, we can give them citizenship, it won't dilute. We don't want, why doesn't he want area A and B? Of course he wants area B. Well, why is he not willing to include area A and B? For demographic reasons. So the debate is very pragmatic. The debate is not ideological. I'm not talking about what you think or I think, but in terms of a common narrative. Eitan Kabul, a long time MK, he wasn't born in 1996, he's been an MK since 1996, member of the Knesset, Labour, came out earlier this year. He said, we should define what the settlement blocks are, and we should apply Israeli law to them, and while freezing and evacuating communities beyond the blocks. It's a different annexation plan. Not the whole of Area C, but the blocks. And give a commitment not to build outside of the blocks. It's another plan. This plan saves a chance for long-term peace and stops having a binational state, the demographic issue. It's coming from the left. There's no one on the other side to talk to. So what do we do in the meantime? That's where the real debate is. So without a partner, the question is what to do. And the message is, it's not ideological. It might be to you, and it might be to me, and it might be to he or she. But at the end of the day, to the body politic in Israel, the paradigm hasn't changed for 100 years. We agree to share, happily or unhappily. The reason it hasn't happened is because of the other side not being willing to share. They're back in 48, not 67. And our problem is what to do in the meantime. So there's status quo. Status quo is easy. That means you don't do anything. Under the status quo, we're not doing so badly. Well, we are in one way. The occupation continues, if you want to use those terms. But, Israel's been, blooming. You go to Israel, I used to argue, for those from New South Wales, we used to have a premier called Mike Baird. Right? And Mike Baird had measured success by only one index. He called it the crane index. The number of building cranes in Sydney. And I said to him, you haven't been to Israel. He said, look, there's nothing better than New South Wales, in terms of the crane. He finally went to Israel, and he came back. He said, well, maybe it's the same. But that place is building while the area around it is not doing as well. I mean, status quo, not so bad. 2 states, a confederation with Jordan, these are just options. 1 state, that's another option. Partial annexation, if so, what, where? One state, you've got to worry about the demographic question. You've got to worry about the democracy side of the independence. Confederation with Jordan suits us, doesn't seem to suit Jordan or the Palestinians. You know, Avigdor Lieberman, generally regarded as the most right-wing member of the Israeli Knesset, when it comes to land, is the most left-wing. He's more left-wing than Labour. Because he has focused only on one issue, demography. So if you know your map of Israel, the northeast, Al-Faham and all that, they call it the triangle, up near the top, he says, you can't move those people from their homes, that's ethnic cleansing. But you know what? We'll make the Palestinian state even bigger. And he's a settler, by the way, right? He lives in Noctim. There's a petition to get him thrown out. But anyway, make the Palestinian state even bigger, and the Palestinians will have what they want. Those Israeli Arabs will be able to live in a Palestinian state. That's why Israeli Arabs hate him, because they're worried he might actually do it. You know, when Julie Bishop spoke to Khaled Abu Dama, an Israeli Arab journalist, she said to him, so tell me, Khaled, this was some years ago, she changed her mind, she understood a better understanding. She says, tell me, Khaled, when there'll be a Palestinian state, you'll move into it. He said, are you crazy? She said, what do you mean? He said, I'm a journalist. She said, so? He said, there's no such profession in an Arab state. You're just a mouthpiece for the government. He said, I want to stay here. I want to complain. I want to complain to garbage and clean up. I want to get better rights, but I'm going to stay here. The truth is, folks, Israeli Arabs prefer living in the Jewish state than in an Arab state. If you're a man too, but, you know, particularly if you're a woman, if you're gay, you can't compare the difference in rights. And we saw Kabul partial annexation, Bennett partial annexation, different total partial annexation. Something else? Might be something else comes along. Who knows? I don't know. You know, Trump and Bibi, you got the Prime Minister of Israel, supposedly a right-winger, you got the President Trump in the White House, and you know what we know is true about Israelis, because Israelis are counterintuitive always. You know, Ben Gurion used to stand on his head on Tel Aviv beach every day, you know, because of a bad back, but you can also think that's maybe why we look at everything in an inverse way. Most Israelis' willingness to please the international community has been directly proportional to how supportive they feel that community of Israel is. Obama, they feel, is anti-Israel. They're not going to do a thing to make him happy. Clinton, best friend Israel ever had, Bill, you know, White House launch shake with Arafat. He brought us to that. Camp David, he brought us to that. When it wasn't good enough for the Arabs, he made a better offer on our behalf later in the year without even asking us. But we said, okay, Bill's making it, you know, he loves us. The only pressure Israelis can't resist is the pressure of an embrace. You hug the Israelis, they're going to give up a hell of a lot more. Settlement building, folks. Trump and Bibi. Today should be the #1 time of settlement building if your old paradigms hold. Guess what the statistics show? Lowest building in 8 years over the green line under Trump and Bibi. It's official. It's not. It's an official building statistic. So you have to ask yourself why. Well, Bibi, some people say, is not that committed to keeping, for the reasons we spoke about Yudav Shomron anyway. And Trump's putting a lot of pressure on Israel not to build. Keeping open the possibility of negotiations, and he's successful in doing that because we like him, or Bibi likes him. He's our friend. Friend asks us, it's going to be easy to get it done. So 25 years after Oslo, there isn't really, in the narrative, it's not an ideological question, it's the two factors, security and demography. And if we manage to convey within our discussions, override our personal view on what should or shouldn't be, it's really not fair for us to put our personal view onto how we interpret Israeli policy, but look at the narrative over 100 years. The narrative hasn't changed. There is a consistent narrative, and I think that if we stick to the narrative without superimposing our own personal views, we're going to have a much better ability to transmit a unified message, but a unified message that actually is correct. We have aspirational wishes ourselves. It's like with the map that I spoke about earlier. We all have an idea.
Would everyone please make their way, wrap up the session and make their way
We're wrapping
to
up.
the Beeson
So
Performing
we
Arts
all have our own
for our
view.
keynote address. Everyone please make their way to the Beeson Performing Arts Centre and please be seated immediately.
We all have our own ideas of how the map should look, but what we should look at is what actually Israel is aiming to do, and if we get that across, we're going, I think, to be much more successful with our students. I'm happy to have a discussion on the way to the Beeson later.